Hello, my name is Marlene Resnick-Simons. I'm here to talk about 3 topics that I've not seen connected to each other in the past, but have found a compelling relationship that I think is worthy of sharing. This is the first session of the series. Please like and share if you're moved to do so. The title of this series is The Link That Connects Chaos Theory, Corporal Punishment, and Racism. We begin with Chaos Theory, Part 1. In the following video series, I am using very limited definitions of all 3 topics. Chaos Theory, specifically sensitive dependence on initial conditions, which I will endeavor to explain. Corporal punishment, during the dramatic development that takes place between the ages of 2 to 4 years old, and racism as a targeting mechanism for the cultural validation of bigotry. Each of these concepts is far broader and deeper than I can possibly discuss in any but a very limited way. But we begin with chaos theory. It's a branch of mathematics focusing on the study of chaos systems whose apparently random states of disorder and irregularities are often governed by deterministic laws that are highly sensitive to initial conditions. This theory is essentially about a small alteration early in a process or chain of events which later can give rise to dramatic consequences. This is particularly relevant to complex living systems which remain unpredictable. Carrie Emanuel, a professor in the Department of Earth, Atmospheric, and Planetary Sciences at MIT, says, "To say that certain systems are not predictable, no matter how precise you make the initial conditions, is a profound statement. Instead of a vision of science in which any prediction is possible as long as we have enough information, Lorenz's work suggested that our ability to analyze and predict the workings of the world is inherently limited. This is particularly relevant to the development of individuals where a multitude of conditions impact early childhood development. It's impossible to extract a linear conclusion from the multitude of factors that influence the life of a young child, but a great deal of data does provide insight into some basic indicators regarding mental and physical health in later years. I think that the example of an avalanche for this exploration of sensitive dependence on initial conditions may provide a useful metaphor for the emotional development that takes place in early childhood. We've all seen an avalanche demonstrated in films where one or more snowfall or where a loud noise or any other vibration can trigger a devastating avalanche, where people, towns, buildings can be buried in snow. The initial conditions had already been set up for future devastation. So when the final and decisive snowflake falls, it provides the tipping point where the addition of one more snowflake or one loud sound causes an avalanche. The initial conditions for the emotional landscape for children are established in the early years of their lives. There's an abundance of research that documents that the earliest phase of infancy is all about the establishment of trust. Erik Erikson identified the first 15 months of life as the time when children develop a base of trust or mistrust in the adults and the environment in which they find themselves. Trust grows from being cared for and nurtured. Distrust comes from a lack of care and comfort, as well as from being physically or emotionally hurt or neglected. When our caregivers are trustworthy, the emotional landscape that forms creates a gentle slope, one that is more resilient to the kinds of stress and challenge that are a part of everyday life. When the child operates at high stress because a parent or caregiver is hurtful, unpredictable, or negligent, we develop a distrust of the people on whom we rely for care and protection, and we distrust the environment in which we live. As a result, we may also experience a diminished ability to feel empathy for others. During the age of 15 months to 3 years old is a time when children also learn about willpower, where children develop a sense of autonomy, a sense of themselves, where they approach life as excited explorers, learning from each interaction, each experiment. For this discussion, I will use the developmental time frame of 15 months through 4 years old. If instead of developing a sense of autonomy, young children are governed by a sense of shame, doubt, and the fear of being hurt and humiliated, this creates a sense of mistrust in their parents and caregivers, as well as a distrust in the environment in which they find themselves. If pain and humiliation are paired with the child having to act respectfully and lovingly toward a parent who uses hurtful and humiliating practices, a strange mix of love and pain become intimately entwined. Not surprisingly, more abuse occurs during toilet training than during any other developmental step. Parents' expectations often exceed the child's abilities or understanding, and the child's frustrations and imperfect attempts at self-control are easily mistaken for willful disobedience. As quoted in the American Association of Pediatrics Health Initiative, Practicing State Safety. Being in an environment in which you may be hit or hurt for reasons often beyond your understanding creates a state of stress that leads to an overproduction of stress hormones. Early brain research indicates that such constant releases of stress hormones actually impact the architecture of the developing brain, resulting in hypervigilance and overdevelopment of the limbic system. This is part of the brain which is the center of emotional reactivity. This also results in less development of the frontal lobe, which provides us with the ability to develop impulse control and helps us to learn to think before we speak or act. So hitting and hurting children works in the exact opposite direction of what parents want to see in their children's behavior and their evolving development. A study by the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child states that excessive stress disrupts the architecture of the developing brain. Adults have no trouble in understanding their own emotions when they might be hit, hurt, or humiliated. The impulse is, of course, to hit or hurt back, or to insult or humiliate. What must a tiny child of 2 or 3 years old feel at such treatment at the hands of someone on who they are totally dependent? When children during this 15-month to 4-year-old phase of development experience life with a fear of being hit, hurt, and humiliated, as they approach each situation, each interaction, they become resentful, angry, and yet are powerless to change the dynamic of the relationship. These feelings get submerged and repressed. They don't just go away. In this type of relationship, children are expected to show respect and are supposed to love their parents regardless of the treatment they receive. This is the time period for the development of willpower as well as impulse control, which lags well behind a child's well-developed verbal abilities. It is the time when children develop a sense of being worthy of love, of being accepted. This is the critical period in the development of initial conditions that create an emotional landscape that will help our children to be resilient as they face the challenges ahead of them. I believe that the stage of development between 15 months and 4 years old is an example of this theory of sensitive dependence on initial conditions. In the hundreds of parenting groups that I have facilitated, it became apparent that those parents who failed at helping their 2 to 4-year-old children to develop a sense of autonomy found themselves in a repeat struggle with their 12 to 14-year-old children. They had used shame and hurtful punishments to control their young children's behavior. Now, those same issues of autonomy, impulse control, and responsibility emerged once again, only this time they came wrapped in a teenage body with raging hormones. The mass shooting, often killing or injuring random individuals, leave authorities searching for motive. We need look no further than many hurtful early parenting practices where an emotional landscape was developed from anger, frustration, and repressed rage. With such an emotional landscape, a motive is not needed, only a trigger. A trigger can be something as insignificant as one more snowflake or one loud sound for a physical avalanche. In the case of an emotional avalanche, it can be an insult, a nasty look, a lack of attention, or a faulty belief. Any incident or thought process can be enough to start an emotional avalanche when the initial conditions were established in the early years and fed into adolescence with hurtful and humiliating words and practices.